With the announcement that the Dallas Fuel will be returning to the Overwatch esports scene, it's got me reminiscing about the Fuel during the Overwatch League. I've been a Fuel fan since the early days. In fact, I own 3 total Overwatch League hoodies. An Atlanta Reign one, since they were my main team, a Seoul Dynasty one, and a Dallas Fuel one. I actually wear it all the time. Here's a completely 100% unedited photo of me from earlier this month wearing it around campus. Aren't I just so handsome? Anyway, the Fuel have always been one of my favorite teams, and with them returning to OWCS for 2026, I'm really excited to root for them. For those of you who didn't see my community post nor my Twitter post, I've been sick with mono for the last couple weeks. If you don't know what mono is, it's a really evil disease that lasts for way too long, and I've been sick for nearly 4 weeks. I'm still a little under the weather even now, so I apologize for how raspy my voice is. Anyway, I've basically been bedridden for the last 3 weeks, and during that time, I've had a lot of free time, and ended up watching old Overwatch League footage, and it gave me the inspiration to talk about one of my favorite teams for a video. So today, I'm going to go over the complete history of the Dallas Fuel, talking about the highs and lows of this franchise, as well as my personal experience. If you like this video and you want to see more Overwatch esports content, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. We just hit 4,000 subs, so thank you all for that. I'm hoping to get back to making more consistent content now that my health has finally improved. With all that said, let's go back in time a little bit and discuss how it all began, in the not-so-distant past of 2017. Before the Overwatch League began, we had the 4 Apex tournaments, and during Apex Season 1, one team was on top of the world. Team Envy was the team to beat, featuring many solid players such as Tymo, Mickey, Chip Cyan, Harry Hook, and Internet Hulk. Team Envy won Apex Season 1 and continued to be a solid team throughout the rest of Apex, placing top 8 in both Seasons 2 and 3, although they never won again. After Apex, the Dallas Fuel would form as a new team for the Overwatch League, and they announced that they would sign majority of the Envy squad. On top of the players I already named, they would also sign Seagull, Effect, AKM, OG, and of course, XQC. To say this team had a lot of hype heading into the inaugural season would be an understatement, and people were ready for this team to compete. Unfortunately, 2018 didn't quite go how fans thought it would. The Fuel started out 0-4, and they would manage wins against the lowly Shock and the soon-to-be 0-40 Shanghai Dragons. The Dallas Fuel would finish Stage 1 3-7, certainly not the start to the season they were hoping for. Stage 2 looked to be going better, as the Fuel started out on a 2-game winning streak, but internal issues would strike them. The team would go on a bad losing streak, and during Week 4, after being suspended, the Fuel would cut XQC, not wanting to deal with that anymore. The Fuel would end up losing the rest of their Stage 2 games. Even though they started out the Stage 2-0, they would finish it 2-8. Between Stage 2 and 3, Custa and Rascal would also both leave the Fuel, and it's kind of really weird seeing them on the Fuel because they weren't really known for their time there, but they weren't on the team for very long. The Fuel would also sign French support player Unko, and this would be their roster for the remainder of the season. Stage 3 was more of the same, going 1-9, with their sole win coming against the lowly Dragons. However, this changed in Stage 4, and the Dallas Fuel would rally for their best stage yet, going 6-4 and barely sneaking into the title matches as the number 4 seed. Unfortunately for Dallas, they would lose a close game to the NYXL, but the Fuel ended the inaugural season on a high note, giving fans some hope for the 2019 season. The Dallas Fuel ended the inaugural season with a 12-28 record, with over half of their wins being in Stage 4. Certainly not the start this franchise was hoping for, and heading into 2019, some changes were made. For starters, Seagull and Effect retired, and Chip Cyan and Coco ended up leaving the team. To make up for these losses, the Fuel made a few signings. They brought in Closer from the reigning champion London Spitfire, as well as DPS player Zachary and main tank player Note. The Dallas Fuel headed into 2019 with some optimism, but the GOATS meta had other plans. For those of you who don't know, the GOATS meta was an infamous time in Overwatch history, where teams would basically always have to play 3 tanks and 3 supports, usually D.Va, Reinhardt, Zarya, Lucio, Brig, and Zen. This was a really tough meta for DPS players, and teams that really relied on their DPS players were struggling. This really shifted the dynamics in the league, and it would kind of benefit Dallas, but kind of not. They were fine at playing GOATs. They weren't exceptional like the Shock or Titans, but they certainly weren't bad. The Fuel would actually start out 4-3, but they would actually just barely miss out on the Stage 1 playoffs, being literally one seed away and losing the tiebreaker, which was the reason they didn't make it in. In Stage 2, though, they would rally and go 5-2, which was their best stage up until this point. They would make the Stage 2 playoffs, but would get swept by the Vancouver Titans in a game that wasn't particularly close. However, this would actually be the high point for the Dallas Fuel, as Stage 3 was just horrible. The team struggled to adapt to the changes in the meta, with characters like Sombra and Ball being played, and they would fall to a 1-6 record at the bottom of the league. Finally, in Stage 4, the GOATS meta would be eliminated with the introduction of Roll-Lock. However, the Fuel were somehow even worse at this. And at this point, I think the mentals of this team had fully crumbled. I know the fans were definitely completely like, it's so over. They felt like a lot of NFL fans whenever their team is starting to do bad, they're like, all right, just tank the season, it's over. The Fuel would end up going 0-7 in Stage 4, which was tied for the worst in the Overwatch League with, of course, the Boston Uprising. Obviously, the Fuel did not make the playoffs, and they finished the 2019 season with a disappointing 10-18 record. At this point, it was pretty clear that things obviously needed to change. This team was quickly becoming irrelevant, and the Dallas Fuel's cycle of misery was in full swing. The Fuel would end up making lots of changes in the 2019 offseason, with fan favorites like OG, Tymo, Mickey, and later Zachary all departing. They would sign several new players, including Gonsu, Crimso, Paintbrush, Onigod, and a new fan favorite, Doha. This team also had Decay for this season, who was a major part of the team until his departure midway through the season. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though. Let's start at the beginning of the 2020 season. Of course, this season was really screwed up due to COVID, and it caused a lot of LAN events to be cancelled, but luckily online matches were still able to be played. The Dallas Fuel started out the season 4-6, entering the May Melee as the 8th seed in North America. They would actually get a nice win over their rivals, the Houston Outlaws, in the knockouts, but they would end up losing to the San Francisco Shock in the first round of the bracket, which, to be fair to them, the Shock did win that tournament, so at least that's a consolation. The Fuel would kind of struggle during the Summer Showdown and Countdown Cup, but they'd manage a nice 3-2 win over the Washington Justice in the Countdown Cup knockouts. They would finish the season with a 9-12 record, which normally wouldn't be good enough for the playoffs. But in 2020, everyone got a chance at the playoffs, so the Fuel entered as the North America number 8 seed. However, they wouldn't really get a chance to do anything, as they would end up getting swept by the Washington Justice, who had a bit of a resurgence during the 2020 playoff meta. They would end their 2020 season a little bit earlier than planned, and up until this point, the Dallas Fuel were largely a below-average, somewhat bad team. But heading into 2021, things would finally change for the better. In the offseason, the Fuel made the surprising move to release their entire roster, except for Doha. They would end up signing a new coach, Rush, and he would bring over several of his former players from Element Mystic, who all played for the Paris Eternal in 2020. He brought in Sparkle, Hanbin, Exy, and Fielder. On top of that, they would end up signing Jexa for main support and Fearless for main tank. To say this roster was improved over previous years would be an understatement, and the Fuel headed into the 2021 season with a ton of hype. They started out a little slow, dropping games to their Texas rivals in the Washington Justice, but they managed to make it to the May Melee knockouts with a 2-2 record, as the 6th and final seed. They would end up sweeping the defending champion San Francisco Shock, and then get their revenge against the Outlaws, sweeping them as well. In the May Melee bracket, they would beat the Chengdu Hunters and then the Dragons twice, once in the winners finals and again in the grand finals. Fearless's Winston and Fielder's Ana in particular really helped elevate this team, and in a nice 6-map affair, the Dallas Fuel finally did it. Their first stage win in franchise history, cementing themselves in the Owl legacy. Even with this win, there were still 3/4 of the season left, and the Fuel needed some more wins to stay on top. In the June Joust, the Fuel would go 3-1, and in the knockouts, they would yet again defeat their Texas rivals, and in a bit of an upset, they would defeat the LA Gladiators in order to advance to the June Joust bracket. The Fuel looked to be on a tear, sweeping the Shanghai Dragons and knocking out the Atlanta Reign in winners finals. Their Lucio Moira comp was nigh unbeatable, specifically with Fielder on Moira, who produced an unreal amount of healing. Unfortunately, nothing could have prepared them for the resurgence of the Shanghai Dragons. The Dragons figured out the key to the meta, Wrecking Ball. Fate's Wrecking Ball really threw the Fuel off during the finals, even making Fearless swap off of Winston at one point. This was an extremely close game. In fact, the series went the full distance, with Dallas going up 3-1 in the beginning of the series. But Shanghai's ball comp seemed to stump the Fuel, and despite going up 3-1, they would lose a heartbreaking game 3-4. Even with this tough loss, the Fuel somehow managed to step it up even more in the Summer Showdown, going a perfect 4-0, the first undefeated stage in the Fuel's history. They would beat the Justice and make it to the bracket, but things just weren't the same. The rise of Wrecking Ball and APAC was just too much, and the Chengdu Hunters beat them twice, eliminating them in 3rd place. At this point in the season, the Fuel were so far ahead of the other North America teams that they could afford to basically rest up, not practicing nearly as hard for the final tournament and focusing on the playoffs. And the Shanghai Dragons, who were in the same boat, also did the same thing. They'd finish out the Countdown Cup 2-2, giving them an 11-5 record on the season. However, despite not actually having the best record in North America, their excellent performances in the tournaments meant it really didn't matter, and they entered the playoffs as the number 1 seed from North America and the number 2 seed across the entire Overwatch League, only behind their brand new rival, the Shanghai Dragons. In the playoffs, the Fuel took care of business, beating the Justice and getting their revenge on the Chengdu Hunters. They reached the winners finals in yet another matchup against the Shanghai Dragons, but the Dragons were just too good in 2021, and the Fuel fell to the lower bracket finals, where the Atlanta Reign greeted them. And now we get to my favorite part of any recount from the 2021 season, the Atlanta Reign's lower bracket run. The Reign were honestly just happy to still be in the tournament at this point, as most people expected them to get about a 5th or 6th place finish, yet here they were. After upsetting the LA Gladiators and the San Francisco Shock, the Fuel were the next victim of their rush comp. In a very close game, closer than the score would show, the Reign would end up completing their lower bracket run, with their reward being an absolute obliteration by Shanghai in the finals. Unfortunately for the Fuel, they would fall just short in 3rd place, and heading into 2022, it was clear that they were close, really close, but they needed to make a few changes. In the offseason, Repel and Jexa left the team, as did Pine, who I realize I never really mentioned. Yeah, Pine was technically on the 2021 Fuel, but he basically never played, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, the Fuel would end up signing former Atlanta Reign DPS player Edison, as well as rookie main support player Chio, who was an exciting up-and-coming Korean talent. Another major change for 2022 was the move to 5v5, meaning that the Fuel could no longer have both Fearless and Hanbin playing at the same time. Heading into 2022, the expectations for the Fuel were pretty high, and things started out kinda how you'd hope. The Fuel started out the kickoff clash 5-1, their sole loss actually being in their opening match against the Houston Outlaws, which was actually one of the first LAN events since COVID, being hosted in San Antonio. After this tough loss, the Fuel rattled off 5 straight wins and headed into the kickoff clash tournament as heavy favorites. The Fuel would beat the Toronto Defiant, but would get sent to the lower bracket early, dropping a game to the dominant LA Gladiators. They would surge to the lower bracket, beating the Mayhem, Shock, and Reign on the way to a revenge game against the Gladiators in the finals. However, it became clear that the Fuel were just not as good as the Glads were, and they got swept 4-0. I think the Fuel had a bit of a hangover from this game, as they would attempt to utilize their rookie hit scan, Gurio, and would start out the mid-season madness by getting swept, both by the Shock and Reign, and they quickly decided to sub in Edison, who became their primary hit scan for the rest of the season. After these back-to-back losses, though, the Fuel turned the stage around. They won their next 4 games and finished the stage 4-2. Now, heading into the Mid-Season Madness, this was quite the tournament. For my money, the 2022 Mid-Season Madness tournament was the best one in Overwatch League history, with insane games, wild upsets, multiple lower bracket runs, and just generally being super entertaining. In fact, this tournament was so good that I made an entire video talking about it, so check that out if you want a full summary. However, for the Dallas Fuel, this tournament was rough. In their first game, they were swept by the Shanghai Dragons, and in the lower bracket, they'd be upset by the Philadelphia Fusion. And just like that, the Fuel were out first, eliminated in 12th to 16th place. There was a lot of noise around the Dallas Fuel at this point, some people calling them frauds, and some serious doubts began to form, especially around Fearless, who had not really been playing his best game up until this point. The meta changed drastically following the Mid-Season Madness, with the introduction of Junker Queen. The meta shifted into this super weird double main support meta, with the main heroes being Junker Queen, Sojourn, Genji, Brig, and Lucio. This meta was dubbed Jotes by the community, and it just so happened that this meta was perfect for Dallas. Sparkle was able to play his signature Genji, Edison emerged as one of the league's best Sojourns, Chio was able to play his Lucio, and Fielder had a sneaky good Brig, only adding to his flexibility. Of course, the main reason for the Fuel's success was none of those players. It was Hanbin, who immediately became the best Junker Queen player in the world during this stage. Hanbin is simply incredible on Junker Queen, and he led this team to a perfect 6-0 record for only the second time in Dallas' history. They entered the Summer Showdown tournament as the number 1 seed, and despite nearly getting upset by the Justice in round 1, they were able to handle the rest of this tournament pretty easily. They beat the Mayhem and then swept the Shock in Winners Finals. In the Grand Finals, Hanbin and the Fuel established themselves as the team to beat by sweeping the San Francisco Shock for the second time in 2 days, winning the Summer Showdown in a dominant 4-0 fashion. The Fuel would finish out the season going 5-1, their only loss yet again going to the Houston Outlaws in a LAN game, this time being the one hosted by the Dallas Fuel themselves. The Fuel finished the 2022 season with a 20-4 record, which gave them the number 1 seed in the playoffs. This was it, probably their best chance to win it all. But the meta changed yet again. With the introduction of Kiriko, the meta was drastically changed, basically being Reaper and Sojourn for DPS, Kiriko and Lucio for support, and Winston for tank. Hanbin could no longer carry this team, and the noise surrounding Fearless's play from earlier in the season began again. The Fuel started their playoff push with a hard-fought 3-1 victory over the Hangzhou Spark, followed by a sweep over the Seoul Dynasty. In the Winners Finals, they yet again faced off against their Texas rival, and not only was Fearless playing insanely well, quelling a lot of those rumors and discussions about him being washed, but Edison was actually one of the players who stepped up. His Sojourn was genuinely the reason the Fuel won a lot of games. The Fuel would beat the Outlaws 3-1 and would move on to the Grand Finals, where they would face off against the San Francisco Shock, who completed a crazy lower bracket run of their own. This was it. Either the Shock would claim their 3rd ring, or the Fuel would finally break the cycle of misery and become Overwatch League champions. To put it simply, this final was incredible. One of the single best matches in Overwatch history. 7 back-and-forth maps with no one team really looking like they'd run away with it. This match was just perfect, and for me personally, it was one of my favorite games of all time. One of my favorite college memories was watching the 2022 finals with my girlfriend, drinks and snacks, hanging out, and enjoying one of the best games I've ever gotten to watch. Of course, I was rooting for Dallas, and I remember watching Map 7 with my heart racing. It really did feel like either team could take it, but on Colosseo, Edison took over, and the Fuel did it. After 5 long years, multiple terrible seasons, players changing year in and year out, the Dallas Fuel finally broke the cycle of misery, and they won the 2022 Overwatch League Finals. Fearless won a very deserved Finals MVP, although I do think Edison probably should have won it, but Fearless's story was better, so not much of it was still a good choice. Mitch's final call at the end of the game still gives me chills to this day. That's up there with the best calls in Overwatch history.
How do they touch the card? The bubble's going to be there, Violet's going to be forced away, he's in grave danger indeed! The touch is there from Striker, he has a death blossom, but there's no chance! The Dallas Fuel take their place amongst the stars! To burn brighter than them all! Rising to become your 2022 Overwatch League champions!
However, this isn't where the Fuel story ends. After such a perfect finish and an incredible season, things really could only go down from there. In the offseason, the Fuel unfortunately lost several key players, most notably Doha, Fearless over to the Outlaws, and both of their support players, Fielder and Chio, both left for the Atlanta Reign. They were able to retain Sparkle, Edison, and Hanbin, and in order to replace their superstar support line, they signed hyped-up rookie main support Bliss and a very controversial flex support in MCD, who had some issues regarding his previous comments about Chinese people. You know, not terrible changes, but it was a notable step down from 2022. The other major change for the Fuel in 2023 is their move to the APAC region, which upset a lot of fans. I mean, the move made sense considering the entire team and coach were Korean, but a lot of Fuel fans were pretty sad their team was leaving North America. In the spring stage, the Fuel seriously struggled, dropping games to the Charge, Spark, and newly rebranded Seoul Infernal. They started out 0-3, but managed to string together some wins against the Dragons and Dynasty, and finished the spring stage with a 2-3 record. The Fuel would miss the midseason madness, entering the summer stage with a lot to prove. In the APAC summer stage, contender teams were able to compete, and the Dallas Fuel ate these teams alive. The Fuel would go an astounding 7-1 during the summer stage, beating every single contenders team and almost every single APAC team. Their only loss was a very close 2-3 loss to the Hangzhou Spark, who were looking like one of the best teams in APAC. After this insane turnaround, the Dallas Fuel actually managed to finish the season with a 9-4 record, qualifying for the play-ins. And in the play-ins, the Fuel would beat both the Dragons and Dynasty 3-0, moving on to the play-in finals, with the sole remaining APAC playoff spots up for grabs. The Dallas Fuel would beat the Dynasty yet again and would sneak their way into the 2023 playoffs. The 2023 Fuel were a major Hanbin backpack job, and I think Fuel fans were just thankful to see them make the playoffs, even if it was as the last seed. In the playoffs, the Fuel would actually get a really nice playoff win, beating the Seoul Infernal in a really good game. Unfortunately, they just weren't quite able to defeat the Florida Mayhem or Houston Outlaws, and they would get eliminated in 5th-6th place. Still, if it was any consolation, both of the teams they lost to would end up making the Overwatch League finals, so not all bad there. At the end of the 2023 season, the Overwatch League would disband, and I thought that would be the end of the Dallas Fuel. But here we are, 2 years later. On November 29th, 2025, the Dallas Fuel announced they would be returning for the 2026 OWCS season. This was a move that makes me really excited. I've said it before, but one of the main things that made 2025 so difficult for me for watching OWCS is I didn't really have a team to root for. Yeah, I rooted for Crazy Raccoon because they have my favorite player, but that's not my team, you know? I've really had that bit of an issue, and with the Dallas Fuel coming back, that's no longer a problem for me. Again, I said it earlier, I only own 3 hoodies from Overwatch League teams, and the Dallas Fuel were one of them. This was undoubtedly going to be my team heading forward, and a team that I'm going to be rooting for every step of the way. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as when we were in the Overwatch League. The Dallas Fuel that I knew is long gone, but I'm going to be excited to support this new era of the Dallas Fuel, and honestly, I'm just really happy they're back. One of the teams that I grew up with, I spent a lot of my high school and early college years rooting for the Dallas Fuel. And now that they're back, as I'm about to graduate, it's a really cool experience. Hopefully, they're really good next year, and I'll be able to root for them in the playoffs. That's all I can really ask for. With that said, that is the complete history of the Dallas Fuel. I really hope you enjoyed. If you've watched this video to this point, you probably like my stuff, so do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. This has been a really tough month for me. As I said earlier, I've been in really bad health. I was supposed to have another nasal surgery to help me out with breathing. Unfortunately, I had mono, which meant I couldn't do my surgery. I got it pushed back to March, so hopefully I'll get that done over spring break. But yeah, it's been a really difficult last few months for me. I had a really high fever, really couldn't stand. I've lost a lot of weight because I couldn't eat any food, and just generally felt terrible. I was bedridden and just unable to get things done or be motivated to work on things. And I'm glad that things are finally starting to get back to normal. I had a blast making this video. It's just good to do something that I really enjoy doing again. It had been a while. Sorry about the basically month-long hiatus. I don't really like going that long without uploading, but I gotta do what you gotta do when you can't even get out of bed. Hopefully, though, my health is back to normal. Things are going to be improving, and I've got a lot of fun ideas that should be coming out in much more reasonable amounts of time. All I can really say is thank you guys so much for 4,000 subscribers. Never really thought I'd get here, but the last year or so has been really incredible. And I think 2026 is going to have a lot of fun content coming up. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. And as always, love you guys.